In this lecture, we're going to create our very first Xamarin iOS app. Open up Xamarin Studio. I'm running this on a Mac. You won't be able to do this on a PC, incidentally. Within Xamarin Studio, click New Solution, and you have a bunch of templates you can choose from. We're not going to create a cross-platform app in this series. I'm going to cover that in a completely different series. We're just concentrating on iOS because it's important to know the individual ecosystems before we try to go cross-platform. So click iOS, App. We have some options. Single View App. This is simply a single screen that shows on a device. We have a Master Detail app. And if you look at the screenshot, it's quite similar to, for example, the Gmail app, where you have one pane to select items and another pane that shows those items at the same time. We have a tabbed app, which is the classic iOS pattern, where we have tabs at the bottom that allow us to choose between different screens. We have a page-based app, and typically you would use this when your user first installs an app and you want to present them with a couple of instructions and a few thank you messages, whatever you like. They can swipe through each page before their app actually opens. And finally, we have a web view app, and this seems quite new to Xamarin. I don't recall seeing this before, but we're not going to cover this. So create a single view app and hit Next. Your app needs a name. Let's call this My First App. Your organization identifier is basically your website, but in reverse. So I have gkmicro.com for my consulting. You would put com.gkmicro. And then the bundle identifier that's created below that adds your app name, but lowercases everything and removes spaces by replacing them with a dash. That bundle identifier has to be unique. So if you're planning on publishing on iOS, it's always best to go into your Apple developer account, create the bundle identifier, and check that it is unique. We want devices iPad and iPhone. This is a universal app, so it'll run on both. I don't really foresee any situations where you would only have it on iPhone or iPad, but your case may be different. Then select the minimum iOS version you want to support. These days, I believe iOS 9 is on 77% of devices. That's of February 2016. So you can either choose iOS 9 as the minimum or go all the way back to 8. I'm going to choose 9 for this project. Hit Next. It asks for a project name, a solution name, and where to store it. We'll leave the project and solution as they are, and I'll just store it in projects. Actually, I may put this on my desktop, so I've got easy access to it later. And before you hit Next, you have an option for version control. If you click Use Git for version control, and then you install the GitHub desktop, later on you'll be able to publish this source code direct to GitHub using their desktop application. So I generally leave this checked because although I don't publish a lot of code, when I do, it's much less painful to actually select it now. Right, let's click Create. And all of our project files and structure will be created for us. So we have My First App Master, which is the solution. We have My First App, which is the actual iOS project. Now, when you create a cross-platform application, My First App will be appended with .ios or .droid or with no appendage, depending on the platforms that you're targeting. Right, we've opened up the first file here, the app delegate. The app delegate is the file that iOS uses to communicate to your app. So things like push notifications and general remote control events are usually processed through app delegate. So it's the area that we're going to listen to events for. You wouldn't put most of your app code inside app delegate, so don't do it, because you'll just end up with an enormous file. We'll look at where to put our code much later on. For now, there's only one thing left to do, and that's to run our app. Over in the top left corner, we can click the list of devices down and we can choose, for example, an iPhone 5. We can either have debug or release. If you were going to release it, you would need an Apple developer account. Debug doesn't currently require an account. So let's hit play, and that's going to compile the app, open up the simulator, install it on there, and then run it for us. So just give your iPhone a second to boot up, and Xamarin automatically creates a splash screen for you, and you are presented with a blank app. Come back to Xamarin. Before we click stop in the top left corner, look at the bottom section. We have a couple of windows where we can look at various things like locals, breakpoints, threads. I won't go into these now because we'll cover them as we go through the course. We also have a window called Application Output. And if I click this on, this is all of the messages that have been sent back to Xamarin from our simulator. So if I wanted to send a message to myself from the app, I would write something like console.writeLine, and whenever that's executed, I would get a message somewhere in here to tell me what's happening. That's all covered later on, or as we go through the debug sections of this course. Right, so we've created our first app, we've run it. I'll just hit stop. And we're ready to proceed with a little bit of coding. But first of all, in the next lecture, we're actually going to look at all of this structure on the left-hand side. What are all these files and what do they do?